The market was alive with noise, full of alien voices shouting prices, smells of strange food and sharp spices mixing in the warm air. Bright stalls lined the street, each one crowded with goods from different planets. Heavy wagons rolled past, pulled by creatures with long legs and wide eyes. People pushed, bargained, and laughed, paying no attention to anything beyond their trade. In the middle of this chaos, a tall merchant drove his overloaded wagon through the crowd. Metal cages rattled inside, covered by thick cloths, and boxes were stacked so high they nearly tipped over. As the wagon bounced over a cracked stone, a small, round metallic capsule rolled off the edge. It hit the ground with a dull thud and spun toward the dusty street. No one stopped. The crowd stepped around it without even looking. Only one man noticed, a human, dressed in a worn jacket, moving slowly through the market. He bent down and picked up the strange object, brushing away the dust with his thumb. It was cold, heavier than it looked, and small enough to fit in both his hands. He turned it over, searching for markings, and froze when he felt a faint vibration. Then he heard it. 3 soft taps from inside. He held his breath. A moment later, a weak, muffled voice whispered something he could not understand. The sound was so fragile it almost blended with the market noise, but it was there, coming from inside the capsule. He looked around. Nobody else seemed to notice. Before he could try to open it, the merchant returned, flanked by 2 tall guards wearing armor made of black plates. Their reptilian faces were expressionless, but their eyes scanned the ground quickly, searching for something. Each carried a long weapon slung across the back and a small scanning device in one hand. The merchant's gaze swept the market until it locked on the capsule in the human's grip. In that instant, the human felt an instinctive warning deep in his chest. He didn't know why, but he was certain. If he gave it back, whoever or whatever was inside would never be seen again. The merchant started walking toward him, speaking rapidly in a language the human couldn't follow, though the tone was urgent and sharp. One of the guards raised a hand, signaling for the capsule. The human glanced at the small object, then at the armed guards, then back at the capsule. The tapping inside came again, weaker this time. His heart pounded. The air felt heavier, the sounds of the market fading into a dull hum. The merchant's steps quickened. The guards were now just a few meters away. Without thinking, the human slipped the capsule under his jacket and stepped back into the crowd. The guards shouted something, their voices cutting through the air. Several people turned to look, but most went back to their business, pretending not to see. The human pushed past a group of traders, weaving between stalls. He didn't dare run yet. Running would draw too much attention. But he could hear the guard's boots on the stones behind him, steady and determined. His eyes scanned for an exit, anywhere to disappear. The tapping inside the capsule stopped, replaced by a faint, trembling hum, almost like breathing. He pressed it closer to his chest to keep it hidden. He turned down a side path between 2 stalls selling dried fruit and mechanical parts. The alley was narrow, dim, and smelled of old oil. His boots splashed through shallow puddles as he picked up speed. Behind him, the sound of pursuit grew louder. A voice barked an order, and the faint buzz of a drone's propellers joined the chase. He glanced up and saw a small scanning device hovering above the rooftops, its lens sweeping the ground. He ducked beneath a hanging sheet of fabric and kept moving. A sharp voice echoed from the mouth of the alley. The drone zipped forward, searching. The human ducked behind a pile of empty crates, holding his breath. The sound of the drone's scanning beam passed over him, the light brushing the side of his face. He waited, silent, until the sound moved away. When he risked a glance, the guards were still coming, slower now, scanning every shadow. He knew then he couldn't stay in the market. The capsule seemed heavier in his hands, as if the fear inside was pressing through its walls. He thought about setting it down and walking away. Whatever trouble this was, it wasn't his. But then he remembered the voice, soft, pleading, and the strange certainty that if he left it, there would be no second chance. A sharp, metallic clink echoed as one of the guard's boots struck the crates nearby. The human bolted. He turned another corner, the sound of pursuit exploding into shouts and running feet. This time he didn't hold back. He ran full speed, shoving past startled shoppers, leaping over low barriers. His heart hammered, his breath burning in his chest. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to put as much distance as possible between himself and the merchant's men. The narrow paths twisted into darker streets, the noise of the market fading behind him. The buildings here were older, walls stained and windows boarded up. The few people he passed kept their heads down, not wanting to be involved. The human's boots pounded against the uneven stone until finally the sound of the guard's footsteps was gone. Only then did he stop, leaning against a wall to catch his breath. The capsule was warm now, almost alive in his hands. He pressed his ear to it and heard the faint breathing again. Whoever was inside was still there, still waiting. His thoughts raced. He had no idea what kind of creature or person this was, why they were in a capsule, or why the merchant wanted them so badly. But one thing was certain. The moment he decided to keep it, his life had changed. He couldn't go back to the market. He couldn't go back to being unnoticed. He had stepped into someone else's fight, and now it was his too. In the distance, the faint buzz of a drone returned, searching the streets. He pushed himself away from the wall, tightening his grip on the capsule. Somewhere inside, the voice whispered again, soft, desperate, and afraid. He didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. They needed help, and he was the only one who had heard them. The human pulled the capsule tighter against his chest and stepped deeper into the narrow alley. The shouting behind him grew louder, mixed with the heavy boots of the guards. The voices carried a harsh tone that didn't need translation. They were hunting him. His heart beat faster, but his steps stayed quick and controlled. Running too soon in a crowded place would only draw more eyes. He had to get out without anyone remembering his face. He passed under a low wooden arch where the smell of smoke and spices hung thick. The alley twisted left and then right, the walls pressing closer. Small windows looked down at him, some with curious faces peeking for a second before disappearing. A cart of broken scrap metal blocked part of the path, and he had to squeeze between it and the damp wall. He glanced back. The guards were still coming, pushing past anyone in their way. One of them raised a communicator to his mouth, barking orders. Somewhere above, the faint buzz of a drone returned, the sound like a wasp circling too close. He ducked his head and moved faster, turning sharply into a side lane where the shadows were thicker. The ground here was wet from leaking pipes overhead, and each step splashed softly. Behind him, the echo of boots grew sharper. The drone's scanning beam cut through the dark for a moment, sweeping across the walls. He pressed himself against a doorway until the light slid away, then continued. The capsule in his hands vibrated faintly again, and he could feel movement inside. He whispered without thinking, telling whoever was inside to stay quiet, even though they couldn't understand his words. The sound from inside was a soft tapping, not frantic but steady, like someone trying to let him know they were still there. He felt a strange responsibility now. If he got caught, it wouldn't just be his life at risk. The alley spilled out into a narrow street behind the main market. Here, the noise was quieter. Only a few people moving around. Vendors sat beside crates of stale bread and chipped pottery, their eyes avoiding him. The guards weren't far behind. He could hear their orders bouncing off the walls. The drone hovered closer, its shadow sliding over the uneven ground. He kept moving, weaving between piles of discarded goods and crates stacked high against the walls. One of the vendors looked up at him with a flicker of recognition, but said nothing. In places like this, people learned not to interfere. He slipped between two buildings, the space barely wide enough for his shoulders, and came out in another lane that led away from the market. The smell here changed. Damp stone, old cooking fires, and something metallic in the air. He remembered an old route he used to take as a child to avoid paying market tolls. If it was still there, it might lead him out toward the river. He turned left, then right, his boots echoing off stone walls. The sound of the guards had faded slightly, but he knew they weren't giving up. The merchant wanted the capsule too badly. He imagined what might happen if they caught him. The cold look in their eyes made it clear mercy wasn't in their nature. The lane ended in a crumbling archway. Beyond it, a narrow bridge of rotting planks crossed over a drainage canal. The water below was black and slow-moving, carrying the smell of rot. He stepped carefully, each plank creaking under his weight. Halfway across, a shout erupted behind him. The guards had spotted him again. He didn't run faster. Running on this bridge meant risking a fall. Instead, he focused on reaching the other side without slipping. Once across, he darted into another alley and turned toward the old warehouse district. Most of the buildings here were abandoned, windows broken, doors hanging loose. Rats scurried between piles of junk. This was a place where people came to disappear, and that was exactly what he needed. He slipped inside the first building with an open doorway. Dust swirled in the dim light filtering through a cracked roof. Broken crates lay scattered across the floor. He crouched behind a stack of them, breathing hard. The capsule was warm again, and when he lifted it slightly, he could hear a faint voice. It was still too quiet to understand, but it was urgent, full of fear. The drone's sound passed outside, but it didn't come in. He waited until the buzz faded before moving toward the back of the warehouse. A door there opened into a courtyard full of rusted machinery. A few birds scattered as he stepped through. The guards were nowhere in sight, but he knew that wouldn't last. He took a moment to think. Staying in the city was too dangerous. Too many eyes, too many scanners, and too many ways for the merchant to corner him. If he could reach the outer roads before nightfall, he might be able to lose them in the open terrain. But moving through the streets with the capsule meant taking constant risks. Every checkpoint, every patrol could stop him. The capsule tapped softly again, almost like it understood the danger too. He pressed it closer and stepped into a side passage that led toward the southern gate. The streets here were wider, lined with small houses. A few children played in the dust, stopping to watch him pass before running off. The smell of cooking fires drifted in the air, but he couldn't slow down. As he neared the gate, he spotted a patrol scanning travelers. His stomach tightened. He couldn't turn back now. The guards chasing him might already be behind. He ducked into a tailor's shop, nodding quickly at the old alien woman who ran it. She glanced at the capsule, but said nothing, waving him toward the back. He slipped through the rear door into another alley, bypassing the checkpoint entirely. The sun was starting to sink, casting long shadows. The city walls loomed ahead. Somewhere beyond them, he might find safety. But he also knew the merchant's reach didn't end at the gates. If he was going to keep whoever was inside safe, he would need to stay hidden, keep moving, and never let the capsule out of his sight. With one last look over his shoulder, he stepped into the fading light, leaving the city streets behind and carrying the secret of the capsule with him. The old warehouse was silent, except for the faint creak of metal beams in the wind. Dust hung in the air, and broken glass crunched softly under his boots as he stepped deeper inside. He had chosen this place because it was far from the busy streets, hidden behind collapsed walls and piles of junk. The light from the cracked roof fell in long, thin beams, cutting through the shadows. He set the capsule down on an overturned crate and looked at it closely. It was covered in scratches, its surface dented from rough handling. Whatever was inside had been trapped for a long time. He took out a rusted piece of scrap metal he had picked up earlier and wedged it into the seam of the capsule. The metal groaned under pressure, but the lock didn't give way at first. He tried again, forcing the edge deeper. The capsule vibrated faintly, and from inside came a small sound, halfway between a whimper and a whisper. He froze for a moment, listening. The voice spoke again, quiet but urgent, as if it knew what he was trying to do and wanted him to hurry. With a final push, the latch clicked. A hiss escaped, followed by a faint puff of cold air. Slowly, he lifted the lid. Inside, curled up in a tight ball, was a small alien girl. Her skin was pale silver, with faint glowing markings running along her arms and neck like delicate lines of light. Her hair was thin and almost translucent, shifting slightly as if moved by a breeze that wasn't there. Her eyes opened, bright, metallic, and watchful despite the weakness in her body. She stared at him without fear, but also without trust. She tried to sit up, but winced, clutching her side. Her lips moved, forming words in a language he didn't understand. He leaned closer, hoping to catch something familiar, but his translator earpiece didn't react. She tried again, slower this time, her voice rasping. A soft chime from the earpiece told him it was starting to pick up her speech. After a few seconds of processing, the translation came through in a thin, broken tone. "Please, don't give me back to them." Her voice was so small it felt like it could vanish in the air. He glanced toward the warehouse doors, half expecting the merchant's guards to burst in. "Who are they?" he asked quietly, but she only shook her head, eyes darting to the shadows as if she could see them already closing in. He noticed her glowing markings were fading, pulsing weakly. She looked even more fragile now, and when she touched the inside of the capsule, her fingers trembled. "They can track me," she whispered through the translator. "If I stay here, they will find us." He stared at her, trying to make sense of what she meant. Track her? How? Then he saw it, a small device embedded in the side of the capsule's wall, faintly blinking. It was a locator beacon. If it was still active, it had been sending out her position since the moment it fell from the wagon. Without thinking, he smashed it with the scrap metal, breaking it into pieces. The blinking stopped, but her worried expression didn't fade. "Not enough," she said. "They have other ways." She tried to stand, but her legs shook, and she stumbled forward. He caught her before she could fall, surprised by how light she was. Her skin felt unnaturally cool, almost like touching stone that had been left in the night air. She pulled away quickly, shaking her head. "Don't," she said sharply. "It's dangerous." He didn't understand, but the urgency in her voice made him step back. She wrapped her arms around herself and looked toward the broken wall where the sunlight slipped in. "We need to move. Soon." The sound of distant engines rumbled through the air, faint but growing. It wasn't the constant background hum of city traffic. This was different. A low, steady thrum, heavy enough to make the dust tremble in the beams of light. She froze, her eyes wide. "That's them." He moved to the doorway, peering out into the street. Far down the road, he saw it, a sleek black transport skimmer moving slowly between the abandoned buildings, scanning each one with a narrow beam of blue light. The merchant's insignia was painted across its side. He turned back to the girl. "Can you walk?" She hesitated, then nodded, though her legs still looked weak. He helped her climb out of the capsule and gently set her on the ground. Her bare feet made no sound on the dusty floor. She kept glancing at the walls, the ceiling, every shadow. It was clear she had been hunted before. He picked up the capsule and tossed it aside. "They'll be looking for this," he said. She gave a small nod, her glowing markings flickering again, brighter this time, but still unstable. "We must go where the sky is open," she murmured, "and where there is wind. They cannot follow easily there." He didn't know what she meant exactly, but anywhere was better than here. The hum of the skimmer outside was closer now. Light flashed briefly across the warehouse windows as it passed. He grabbed her hand without thinking and led her toward the back exit, keeping low. They slipped out into the narrow space between two buildings. The air here smelled of rust and oil, the ground littered with bits of metal and cracked stone. She kept her head down, moving faster than he expected given her frailty. At the far end of the passage, they turned onto a dirt path leading away from the main road. The sound of the skimmer faded for a moment, then returned from another direction. "They know I'm out," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "They will not stop." He wanted to ask why they wanted her so badly, but the way she said those words made him think the truth might be worse than he imagined. For now, it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was putting as much distance as possible between them and the merchant's hunters. They passed under a rusted archway where weeds grew through the cracks in the stone. The sunlight beyond felt sharper, brighter, almost like they had stepped into a different part of the city. In the distance, the tall walls of the outer district rose above the rooftops. Beyond those walls lay open land and maybe a chance to vanish. She stumbled once, and he caught her again, ignoring her warning not to touch. Her eyes met his for a second, and something in her expression shifted. The fear was still there, but now there was something else. Relief, maybe even trust. The engines roared again, this time from behind them. He didn't look back. He tightened his grip on her arm, and together they disappeared into the maze of streets, leaving the capsule and the life he had known far behind. The sun had started to sink, casting long orange shadows through the forest. The human led her away from the city, choosing narrow dirt paths that twisted between tall, strange trees. Their trunks were wide and knotted, their leaves giving off a faint silver glow. Insects buzzed in the warm air, and every now and then a distant bird-like cry echoed. The ground was soft under their boots, muffling their footsteps, but even in this quiet place, He couldn't relax. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see the merchant's hunters coming through the trees. The alien girl walked close behind him, her breathing light but quick. Her silver markings pulsed softly on her skin, casting a dim light in the growing darkness. "They will follow," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They always follow." He didn't answer. He didn't want to frighten her more, but the truth was, he knew she was right. If they had already sent skimmers into the city, it was only a matter of time before they searched the forest too. A cool wind passed through the trees, making the leaves rustle like quiet whispers. He slowed his pace and listened. At first, there was nothing but the natural sounds of the forest. Then he saw them, faint blue lights moving between the trees, steady and slow. They weren't fireflies or natural creatures. The glow was too sharp, too controlled. He crouched quickly, pulling her down with him behind a thick fallen log. Through the gaps in the bark, he saw shadowy figures moving with the lights. The hunters. They were tall, wearing armor that shimmered in the low light. Some carried long rifles with glowing barrels. Others had devices strapped to their arms that sent out soft scanning beams over the ground. They moved in silence, spreading out through the forest, searching for any sign of them. The girl's grip on his sleeve tightened. "Not traitors," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "Collectors." He turned to look at her. "Collectors?" She nodded quickly. "They take living things, rare ones. They sell them to those who pay the most, warlords, scientists, the rich who want trophies." Her voice shook more as she spoke. "I am the last of my kind. My abilities, they want them for themselves." He understood now why the merchant had been so desperate. This wasn't about money from selling goods. This was about owning something unique, someone unique. "Abilities?" he asked quietly, but she shook her head. "If I use them, it will hurt me, and it will bring more of them." The sound of leaves crunching nearby cut their conversation short. One of the hunters had moved closer, his scanning device sweeping back and forth. The blue beam passed over the log, lighting the wood in a strange glow. The human held his breath, not moving a muscle. The girl's skin markings dimmed almost completely, as if she was forcing herself to hide her light. The beam moved away, and the hunter continued forward, but the danger wasn't gone. More lights appeared in the distance. The hunters were circling, closing off every escape route. He knew they couldn't just sit here. They had to keep moving. He motioned for her to follow, and they crawled away from the log, staying low, weaving through thick bushes. The path ahead sloped downward into a wide clearing. He stopped immediately, pulling her back into the shadows. In the center of the clearing stood a metallic frame with faint energy lines running through it. At first, it looked like part of an old machine, but then he realized it was a trap. The air inside the frame shimmered faintly, like heat rising from hot stone. Around it, thin wires stretched out and sank into the grass, barely visible. "It's a net," the girl said softly, her eyes wide. "Energy binders. Once inside, you cannot move, cannot escape." He scanned the edges of the clearing, looking for another way through, but there wasn't one. The hunters had set the trap in the one place they knew their prey would have to cross. From somewhere behind them, the sound of footsteps grew louder. The hunters were closing in. He could hear their low, almost mechanical breathing through their helmets. There was no more time to think. He took her hand and whispered, "We'll go around. Stay close." They moved along the tree line, keeping to the shadows, but the path narrowed until they were only a few steps from the trap's edge. The faint shimmer seemed to pull at the air, like it was alive. The girl's markings flickered nervously, and she kept her eyes locked on the ground to avoid stepping on the hidden wires. A sharp crack echoed behind them, a branch snapping under heavy boots. They turned to see two hunters emerging from the trees, weapons raised. The blue glow of the net reflected off their armor. The human pushed the girl forward. "Run!" he shouted. They sprinted, aiming for the far side of the clearing, but the moment their feet crossed into the open space, a beam of energy shot from the net's frame. It expanded in an instant, a shimmering wall of force snapping into place around them. The girl screamed as the energy wrapped around her like glowing threads. He tried to pull her free, but the force wrapped around him too, tightening like steel bands. The more he struggled, the stronger it became. From the shadows, the hunters stepped closer, their movements slow and confident. One of them spoke into a communicator, no doubt telling the merchant they had been caught. The human's chest heaved as he fought against the invisible bonds, but nothing worked. The girl's eyes were wide with fear, her breathing shallow. "If they take me," she whispered, "I will never be free again." Her markings began to brighten, the glow spreading across her skin. She clenched her fists, her body shaking. "No," she said through gritted teeth. "I won't go back." The hunters noticed the light and stepped back slightly, raising their weapons. The human could feel the air around her start to vibrate. Something powerful was building inside her, and he understood. This was the ability she had warned him about. The glow became blinding, and the air exploded with a shockwave that ripped through the clearing. The net shattered into fragments of energy, and the hunters were thrown to the ground. The trees shook from the force, and the human fell to his knees, the bonds gone. The girl collapsed beside him, her glow fading fast, her body limp. She had freed them, but at a cost. He could see pain written across her face. He caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her into his arms. The hunters were still down, but they wouldn't stay that way for long. He didn't wait. With the girl held close, he ran into the darkness of the forest, knowing they had only a short time before the chase began again. The forest was dark now, the silver glow of the leaves their only light. The human moved quickly, carrying the alien girl in his arms. She was too weak to walk, her head resting against his chest, her glowing markings fading to almost nothing. Her breathing was shallow, each breath sounding like it took great effort. He kept glancing over his shoulder, expecting to see the hunters pushing through the trees, but for now, there was only the whisper of the wind and the rustle of leaves under his boots. He stopped for a moment to catch his breath near a fallen tree. Setting her down gently on the soft moss, he checked her for injuries. Her skin was cold to the touch, and her eyelids fluttered as if she was struggling to stay awake. "You used too much energy," he said softly, even though he knew she might not understand. Her eyes opened just a little, and she gave a faint nod. "They will send more," she whispered through the translator. Her voice was weak but certain. "Stronger ones, faster ones." She coughed and turned her face away, clearly in pain. He knew she was right. That shockwave she created must have been visible or detectable for kilometers. Whoever was after her now had proof she was still alive and unprotected. They would not stop until they had her. He ran a hand through his hair, thinking hard. Staying in the forest wasn't safe anymore. If they wanted to survive, they had to find shelter far from the merchant's reach, somewhere these collectors couldn't follow easily. He took a sip from his water flask and held it to her lips. She hesitated, then drank slowly, her hands trembling. When she was done, she looked up at him, her silver eyes catching the faint light. "Why? Help me," she asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard. He didn't have a simple answer. Maybe it was because he had heard her voice in the capsule, or maybe because once he saw her fear, he couldn't pretend he hadn't. "Because if I don't," he finally said, "no one else will." She looked at him for a long moment, then closed her eyes again. The quiet between them was broken by a distant, low hum. His head snapped up. It was faint, but it was the sound of engines, moving slowly, sweeping the area. The hunters had regrouped. He quickly lifted her back into his arms and started moving again, this time in a zigzag path to avoid leaving a clear trail. They passed through thicker undergrowth, branches catching at his clothes. Twice, he had to stop and listen as the hum grew louder, then faded again. The second time, he crouched low and hid behind a rock outcrop, peering into the darkness. Through the trees, he caught sight of 3 hovering shapes moving between the trunks. Sleek hunter drones, each one scanning the ground with narrow beams of light. He ducked lower, keeping her hidden beneath his jacket. The drones passed by, but their movement was methodical, covering every meter of the forest. If one of them spotted him, the others would close in instantly. They had to get out before the net tightened. The forest began to slope downward, and soon he heard the sound of rushing water. A river. He followed the sound until the trees thinned, revealing a wide, dark stream. The water was fast but shallow enough in some parts to cross. He stepped carefully into the cold current, the water soaking his boots instantly. Each step sent ripples across the surface, but the noise of the river covered the sound. Halfway across, he looked back and saw one of the drones appear at the edge of the trees. Its beam swept across the water, but he moved quickly, reaching the far bank and climbing up onto the soft, wet ground. The drone hovered a moment longer, then drifted away. Once they were hidden again among the trees, he set her down beside a large moss-covered rock. She opened her eyes slowly and whispered, "You can still leave me. If you stay, they will take you too." He shook his head. "Not happening." His voice was firm, almost harsh, but his grip on her shoulder was gentle. "We're getting you out of here." For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but instead she gave a small, tired smile. "Then we go together." He glanced around. They needed a plan. Running forever wouldn't work, and hiding would only buy them hours at most. "We need transport," he said more to himself than to her. "Something faster than their drones." She shifted slightly, wincing from the movement. "The merchant has a small ship hidden near the city's east trade road." Her voice was faint, but the information was clear. "He uses it for special deliveries. If we reach it, we can leave this world." That was all he needed to hear. If they could get that ship, they might actually have a chance. But the east trade road would be dangerous. Closer to the city meant more patrols, more hunters. Still, it was their only option. The night grew colder, and he took off his jacket, wrapping it around her. Her glowing markings pulsed faintly through the fabric. She leaned against the rock, eyes closing again, and he kept watch, listening for any sound of pursuit. Far away, an echoing howl rose in the air, not an animal, but a hunter signal. He knew what it meant. They had found signs of where he had been. It was only a matter of time before they followed the trail to this side of the river. He touched her shoulder gently. "We have to move again?" She stirred, blinking up at him, and then nodded without complaint. He helped her to her feet, and they began walking along the riverbank, using the water's edge to hide their tracks. The night stretched on, each step carrying them closer to the East Trade Road and whatever dangers waited there. The merchant's ship was their only hope now. He didn't know if they could reach it before the hunters closed in, but he knew one thing for certain. He would not let her be taken again, no matter the cost. The sky was turning pale with the first light of morning as they reached the edge of the forest. The trees thinned out, revealing a stretch of rocky ground leading toward distant hills. Beyond those hills lay the East Trade Road the alien girl had spoken about. The human adjusted his grip on her arm, helping her walk. She was stronger than last night, but still tired, her glowing markings faint and uneven. They kept close to the shadows, moving along the base of the hills. From up here, they could see thin trails of dust in the far distance, merchant caravans moving along the main road. Somewhere among them, the merchant's private landing site had to be hidden. He didn't know what kind of defenses it might have, but he knew it wouldn't be unguarded. The girl's silver eyes scanned the horizon. "That road," she said softly. "It connects to the landing pad through a hidden path, but they may have watchers." Her voice was still weak, but she spoke with certainty, like she had memorized every detail in her mind. They moved slowly, taking care not to cross open ground where they could be spotted. At one point, the human froze, pulling her down behind a low ridge. In the distance, he saw a patrol of 3 hunters on hoverbikes, moving in formation along the base of the hills. They were scanning the ground with small handheld devices, no doubt searching for their trail. He waited until the hum of the bikes faded before standing again. As they continued, the terrain changed. The rocky ground gave way to patches of dry grass and scattered ruins, crumbling walls and broken pillars from some ancient settlement. They took shelter inside one of the ruined buildings for a short rest. The girl sat on a stone, her hands resting in her lap. The human noticed a strange look on her face. Not fear exactly, but something heavier. She reached into the folds of her tunic and pulled out a small metallic disc. It was old and scratched, with strange symbols carved into it. She held it out to him. "This is my clan's seal," she said quietly. "It holds our history, our names. When I am gone, it will mean nothing." He shook his head. "You're not going to be gone." Her eyes softened, but she didn't argue. "I've seen what they do. No one escapes the collectors. You could still walk away." He stared at her for a long moment, then pushed the seal back into her hands. "If they want you, they'll have to go through me first." For the first time, her lips curved into a real smile, faint but genuine. She tucked the seal away, and they continued their journey. By midday, the sun was high and the air shimmered with heat. They reached a ridge overlooking the East Trade Road. From this vantage point, they could see the movement of caravans, small groups of traders, and a few lone travelers. But tucked away behind a cluster of jagged rocks was something different. A narrow path leading to a clearing where a sleek black ship rested on landing struts. "That's it," she whispered. "The merchant's ship." It was smaller than he expected, built for speed rather than heavy cargo. 2 guards stood near the loading ramp, their armor gleaming in the sunlight. Another patrolled the perimeter with a scanning device. The human's mind worked quickly. "We can't just walk in," he muttered. "We need a distraction." The girl's gaze shifted toward the caravans on the road. "If something happens there, the guards will be called away." He nodded slowly. "We just need to make it look big enough." They circled around until they were closer to the road, but still hidden among the rocks. He found a cluster of old fuel barrels abandoned near a ruined shack, probably left behind by some traveler years ago. He checked the weight. Some still had liquid inside. Using a piece of metal scrap, he pried open one of the barrels and spilled the fuel across the ground. The smell was strong and sharp in the hot air. He lit a small cloth with his lighter and tossed it toward the fuel. Flames burst to life instantly, racing across the dry ground. Within moments, thick black smoke rose into the sky. Shouts came from the road as traders scrambled to move their wagons away. The merchant's guards noticed the smoke too. 2 of them ran toward the road, leaving only one at the ship. The human grabbed the girl's hand. Now. They moved quickly, staying low as they approached the landing pad. The last guard turned toward them, raising his weapon, but the human was faster. He slammed into the guard, knocking him to the ground. The weapon clattered away into the dust. Before the guard could recover, the girl stepped forward, her eyes glowing faintly. She placed her hand on the guard's chest, and for a second, a ripple of energy passed through him. His body went limp, unconscious. They ran up the loading ramp, the ship's hull warm under the midday sun. Inside, the air was cooler, smelling faintly of metal and machine oil. The control room was small but well kept, with a sleek pilot's chair and a panel of glowing instruments. The girl sank into the co-pilot's seat, her fingers moving quickly over the controls. "I've seen him fly this ship," she explained. "I can start it." The engines hummed to life, the vibration running through the floor. Outside, the remaining guards had noticed the noise and were shouting. One of them fired a shot that glanced off the ship's hull, leaving a scorch mark. The human sealed the ramp and strapped himself into the pilot's chair. "Let's go before they bring friends." The ship lifted slowly at first, then rose higher, clearing the rocks. From above, they could see the road in chaos, the fire still burning, smoke curling into the sky. The guards below were scrambling, trying to signal for backup, but it was too late. As they broke through the lower clouds, the girl leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. "We are not safe yet," she said. "The merchant will call others. Bigger ships. We need to reach the outer rim." He nodded, his hands steady on the controls. The open sky stretched before them, but the fight was far from over. Somewhere out there, the merchant's network was already moving, and they would have to be faster than the hunters chasing them. The stolen ship cut through the thin clouds, its engines roaring as the human pushed it to full speed. The alien girl sat beside him, her hands gripping the seat, eyes fixed on the display screen. Her glowing markings were brighter now, but not with health. They flickered in warning. She seemed tense, as if she could already feel the danger closing in. The screen flashed red, and a sharp alarm echoed through the cockpit. She pointed quickly. "They're coming." He glanced at the radar. Several small blips were moving fast behind them, closing the distance. The merchant had sent pursuit ships, sleek, sharp-winged craft built for hunting, not cargo. He knew the stolen ship was fast, but it was not meant for long chases against armed pursuers. "How many?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the controls. "4," she answered, her voice tight. "They won't stop." The human's mind raced. They were still too close to the planet. If the hunters damaged the ship here, they would crash. He needed open space, but to get there, they had to survive the next few minutes. He pulled the ship into a steep climb, the hull rattling under the strain. The engines whined loudly, almost as if they were protesting. The girl grabbed the edge of the console to steady herself, her gaze darting between the radar and the rear camera feed. The hunter ships were in formation, their weapons starting to glow. A sudden streak of light passed by their left side, followed by another. Energy blasts, warning shots. The next ones wouldn't miss. "Can you use those abilities again?" he asked, eyes still forward. She shook her head quickly. "Not like that. It will drain me completely. I might not wake up." That answer was enough for him to know it wasn't an option. He banked the ship hard to the right, skimming through a layer of thick clouds. The moisture clung to the cockpit glass, blurring their vision, but it also distorted the hunter's scanners. A burst of light flashed behind them, and he felt the ship shudder as a blast grazed the rear armor. Warning lights flickered on the control panel. "They hit us," she said urgently. "Rear thruster is weakening." He gritted his teeth and checked the navigation system. A small cluster of asteroids was passing near the planet's orbit. It wasn't much, but it could give them cover. "Hold on," he told her, pushing the engines harder. The ship's frame groaned as they sped toward the asteroid field. The hunters followed, firing more shots. Each one missed narrowly, scorching the hull or flashing past into the emptiness beyond. As they neared the asteroids, the human dove between two massive, spinning rocks. The ship tilted dangerously close to one surface, the metal creaking from the strain. The girl gasped, but he kept his hands steady, weaving between the drifting stones. The hunter ships followed, but their speed was their weakness. One clipped the edge of a spinning asteroid, its wing tearing apart before it spiraled away into the void. The other three stayed on them, firing whenever they had a clear shot. The human darted behind a larger asteroid, letting it block the incoming fire. He took the moment of cover to glance at the girl. She was watching him intently, her expression unreadable. "You've done this before," she said softly, almost like it was a realization. He didn't answer. He didn't have time to explain his past, and right now, it didn't matter. They shot out from behind the asteroid and angled upward, leaving the field behind. The hunters were still there, but they had lost some ground. The planet below was now just a curved horizon, fading into the distance. Space stretched ahead, dark and endless, dotted with distant stars. Her voice was calm but serious when she said, "They'll call for a blockade. We need to disappear." He scanned the map. The nearest safe zone was a small moon on the edge of the system, uninhabited and rarely visited. If they could land there and shut down the ship's systems, maybe they could wait until the search passed. He changed course, pushing the engines to their limit again. Minutes felt like hours as the hunters chased them. Another blast hit the wing, making the ship tilt dangerously. He corrected the path quickly, but alarms screamed across the console. "We can't take many more hits," he muttered. The girl looked at the controls, then at him. "I can give you one chance. Just once." She placed her hands flat on the console, her glowing markings pulsing brighter and brighter. The lights in the cockpit flickered, and the engines roared louder, the ship surging forward with sudden, unnatural speed. The acceleration slammed them back into their seats, and the stars outside became streaks of light. The radar showed the hunters falling behind rapidly, unable to match the burst. But the girl's glow dimmed quickly, her body slumping in the chair. He reached over, shaking her shoulder. "Stay with me." Her eyes opened slightly, and she gave the faintest smile. "We are free for now." The moon came into view, a small gray sphere hanging against the blackness of space. He guided the ship toward a wide crater on its far side, hidden from direct scanners. The landing was rough, the damaged thrusters making the ship shudder violently as it touched down. When the engines powered down, silence filled the cockpit. Only the sound of their breathing remained. He turned to her. "You saved us." She shook her head weakly. "No, you did. I just helped." For a long moment, they sat there, the tension slowly fading. Outside, the stars burned quietly, and the planet they had escaped from was just a distant blue-green sphere. But he knew this was not the end. The merchant's network was vast, and word of their escape would spread. She leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes. "Whatever happens next, you are my home now," she whispered. He looked at her, surprised by the words, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he looked out at the stars, his jaw set. They had won this round, but the real fight was still ahead, and he was ready for it.